That action in just a bit. But first, let's head to the Lal Street, which saw its biggest sell-off in recent months. Now, nearly 3 lakh crore worth of investor wealth was lost in a single day. Geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and a rapid rise in crude oil prices forced the bulls to run for cover on the Lal Street. Now, the Sensex lost nearly 800 points, posting its worst single-day fall in nearly a year. Now, the Nifty fell below the 12,000 mark to post its worst fall in 6 months. Bank stocks led the rout, with the Nifty Bank Index losing nearly 3%. There was simply no place to hide, with mid-caps and small caps also getting battered. 5 stocks declined for every advancing stock, and every sectoral index ended in the red. Anuj Singhal is here with the day's market action. Anuj, tell us what sparked off this sell-off and what can we expect tomorrow morning?
Ugly day for the Indian markets today because the markets now have to deal with a fresh risk, geopolitics. And the issue with geopolitics is that it's one of those risks which is tough to measure. You don't know whether it's going to stop today or 7 days and what kind of price damage it will entail. A collateral damage is what's happening to crude prices, with Brent crude past the $70 mark. That itself is a challenge for Indian market, apart from what's happening with the geopolitics. And also keep in mind the market positioning. On Friday morning, the market was sitting at the cusp of a new all-time high, and then this news hit us. So obviously, the positioning was different. Market needed any trigger to correct, and the market got one in form of geopolitics. In terms of today's trade, well, it was brutal. Advanced decline, well in favor of declines. Massive selling in large financials, the bluest of blue chips, SBI, Bajaj Finance, all these stocks falling quite a bit. Bajaj Finance after failing to meet its own gold standards. Well, and across the board, you saw quite a bit of selling. So obviously, the question that now comes to mind is, should this correction be bought into? And what's next for the market? Well, one thing which you have to tell yourself is that even though 6 months down the line, you could, with the benefit of hindsight, say that this was a great buying opportunity, right now, you have to ask yourself, is this getting over tomorrow? Perhaps not. And in that case, there's no brownie point for getting the bottom of the market right. It's important to see if either US or Iran is showing signs of backing down. Crude prices need to be watched very carefully. We need to see the FII action, whether they are getting into risk-off mode. So there are a lot of variables that you need to take into account. This is not a market in which technicals work. And at this point, I'm really reminded of one of my favorite quotes from one of my all-time favorite movies, 21. Always account for variable change. We've had a variable change.
Right, Anuj, thanks a lot for that. So again, very difficult to compute the exact toll that this geopolitical tension is likely to have. Well, in fact, taking the story forward, USA's deteriorating ties with Iran and Iraq on the back of the assassination of top Iranian commander Soleimani has sent oil prices soaring as well. Now, the Iraqi parliament has passed a resolution asking its government to end the presence of foreign troops from the country. This has triggered a response from the White House as well. Now, President Donald Trump has threatened to impose sanctions on the Middle Eastern nation. Meanwhile, Iran has said that it would no longer abide by the uranium enrichment limits under the 2015 nuclear deal. Manisha Gupta now joins us. Manisha, tell us, how will this unravel and what are the implications that we're looking at for the oil prices?
Well, it's the second straight day when we have seen the crude oil prices jump up, and if you look at the Brent prices, they are trading at a 4-month highs, while the NYMEX crude is trading at a 14-month highs. We have seen the tensions between US and Iran continue. There has been a rhetoric that has been ongoing from Iraq, from Iran and US as well. The street is divided into 2 parts. One believes that the worst is yet to come, and we might be looking at a retaliation coming in from Iran or Iraq. Both the countries have pretty much said that, and US also not staying behind, says that they will make disproportionate attacks rather, and they have narrowed down on 50 and more of Iran areas where they could actually have further attacks being done. So yes, it's not over as yet, and if you look at Saudi Arabia, Iran and Iraq, these 3 major oil producers produce 15 million barrels per day of crude, and that is where the premium is coming in from in case of the crude oil prices, where we have seen nearly 9% of gains in the past 1 month. We have seen nearly 6% of gains in the month of Jan until now in 2020. So if there is an escalation, then you perhaps are looking at the crude oil prices running further up from here. Experts say that you could be looking at targets of 80, 90, and there isn't really a ceiling there. But if this dies down and there is not too much done and it is only rhetoric that follows in the next few days, then we might be looking at some consolidation coming in for the crude oil prices. The other big trigger, of course, would also be the US and China trade deal signing, which is happening on 15th of Jan in US. That also is going to be quite supportive for the crude oil prices. So no one really is telling you to sell crude prices from here. It is going to be a range between 68 to 75 if it continues the way it is right now. If there's an escalation, then we are looking at much higher prices from here.
Right, Manisha, thanks a lot for that. So expect the range in the 68 to 75 broadband. That's the big takeaway here. Let's in fact get in a global picture. Let's go across to NBC News. Richard Engel, who gets us the latest on the escalating tensions between the US on one side and Iran and Iraq on the other.
First, let's start out with what's going on in Iran. These are the biggest demonstrations, funeral processions that this country has seen in decades. Iranian state TV says there are millions of people who have gone out onto the streets to mourn the top general who was killed in a drone strike here in Iraq by the United States. They're actually the biggest demonstrations since the death of the Islamic Republic's founder, Ayatollah Khomeini. So this is a very important moment for Iran, and yet again we're hearing more promises from Iranian leaders, including the slain general's successor, that there will be acts of revenge, but no specificity provided. Here in Iraq, there is the fallout of the political decision, the Iraqi parliament voting yesterday to request that the government kick out U.S. forces. There are about 5,000 U.S. troops here. But there is a constitutional question whether the parliament, whether this current prime minister, who in fact resigned in November, has the authority to expel U.S. forces. So it may at this stage be a symbolic vote, but that is certainly the direction that things seem to be heading. A lot of people here, a lot of Shia in this country, who are the majority, think that the United States, President Trump, overstepped his bounds, that the U.S. is now treating Iraq like a personal playground where they can come and carry out assassinations or targeted killings, or however you want to describe the action, when the official reason that U.S. troops are here is to fight ISIS, not to fight some proxy war with Iran.
Right, Richard, thanks a lot for that. So clearly an uncertain picture going forward for this crisis in the Middle East. We'll, of course, track tomorrow morning how the equities respond to it. Let's come back now locally in Delhi. Now, the centre is staring at a cut in its budgetary expenditure by up to 2 lakh crore rupees this fiscal year. Now, this translates to around 1% of India's GDP. Now, remember, both the government's tax revenue as well as divestment collections have so far been below expectations. Sapna Das, who broke that story, now joins us. Sapna, a worrying picture for the government. 2 lakh rupee shortfall is what they're looking at. What impact is the government's spending cut likely to have on its fiscal projections?
Well, what we are given to understand is that the current expenditure management measures taken by the government on December 27th, what they really point towards is the fact that there could be an unspent amount in the budget for the last quarter to the tune of 25 to 30% for the last quarter of the current financial year. So basically 25 to 30% of the Q4 expenditure budget may actually remain unutilized or unspent. Those are the kind of savings that the government may actually be looking at. We are also given to understand that possibly the RE for a lot of ministries, a lot of departments has actually been lowered. Possibly it may also be the fact that, the spending trend had picked up quite a bit in the second quarter. But the first quarter, due to the elections, there was a lag period, and that possible lag has been felt throughout the financial year. And keeping all of that in mind, it may also have been possible that the ministries and the departments may not have been able to spend their entire budgeted allocations for the current financial year, and hence the circular of lowering the spending cap for the current financial year. Clearly, this will help the government try and be around that 3.3% fiscal deficit target. The November CGN numbers already show that the government has exceeded the fiscal deficit target. The question now is possibly how much will be the deviation for this financial year. So possibly these numbers of around 1.75 lakh crore to 2 lakh odd crores could help limit the government's too much deviation from the FD number for FY20.
Right, Sapna, thanks a lot for that quick wrap of the numbers. Now, the Income Tax Department wants to know the details about your foreign travel, your cash withdrawals of more than 10 lakh rupees and even your electricity bill. Now, the new income tax return forms have been released early and it has some key changes which have enhanced the scope of information that can be collected by the Tax Department. Timzi Jaipuria gets us this report.
Well, according to the new ITR forms that have been notified by the Central Board of Direct Taxes yesterday, now the Tax Department is wanting to enhance the scope of information that it gets through these return forms. According to the new forms, if we see it closely, the IT Department has said that any individual who is a salaried person or who has been filing returns under the presumptive tax category will have to be very careful while filing the new ITR 1 and ITR 4 forms. Now let me bring some of the interesting changes that are there in these forms. Firstly, it is now mandatory to give your passport number if you have a passport. Also, very clearly, if you have made a foreign travel, if you've paid electricity bills above a threshold, large banking transactions, well, you will have to file a detailed form which will be notified later, that is ITR 2 and ITR 3. Now, what are these thresholds? These thresholds are if you own a house, whether in a single ownership or a joint ownership, then ITR 1 and ITR 4 are not the forms that you will be filing. You will be filing ITR 2 and ITR 3. Also, if you've incurred a foreign travel of more than 2 lakh rupees in the assessment year, again, more details will need to be given to the IT department. If you paid electricity bill of more than 1 lakh rupees in an assessment year, if you've concluded banking transactions, whether withdrawals or depositing cash of more than 1 crore and above in the current account, and yes, cash withdrawals of more than 10 lakh rupees in any of the savings or current accounts, then yes, ITR 2 and 3 will be your forms and ITR 1 and 4 will no longer be your forms. Also, very interestingly, whether you have an income or not and you have expenditures to such tunes, then yes, definitely, you are no longer outside the income tax ambit. Till now, it was very clear that those who have an income have to file an income tax return. But if you do not have an income and you have expenditures of these thresholds, then yes, definitely, you have to file ITR returns, which will be mandatory. Let's see what are the new two forms, that is ITR 2 and 3. What is the further scope of action and further scope of information that the IT department is wanting you to give back to you?
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today held pre-budget consultations with top business leaders of the country. Now, the meeting was attended by Ratan Tata, Mukesh Ambani, Anand Mahindra and Gautam Adani. Anil Agarwal, Sunil Bharti Mittal and Baba Kalyani were also part of the discussions. The Prime Minister sought suggestions from the business honchos to boost growth rates and create jobs. Well, with that, it's time now to slip into a very short break. But up next, all of our viewers, let's come back to the action, and this time from the court corner. The National Company Law Appellate Tribunal has rejected the government's petition in the Tata Mystery case, which sought changes to its order. Now, the Registrar of Companies had taken exception to the Appellate Tribunal's order, which ruled that the ROC had helped Tata Sons become a private company from a public entity. Now, it had also ruled that the conversion of Tata Sons into a private entity is illegal. The ROC had sought the deletion of the words illegal and within quotes with the help of ROC from the order. But the NCLAT refused to make changes to its order and said that it is not casting any aspersions against the ROC and it is not saying anything malified. The Appellate Tribunal also ruled that the ROC's apprehensions are unfounded. Well, let's move forward now on to action coming in from the Supreme Court today. Now, the Supreme Court and a bench led by the CJI, Justice Bobde himself, today advised industrialists Nasli Wadia as well as Ratan Tata to sit together and resolve their differences. Now, the Apex Court was hearing a criminal defamation case filed by Wadia against Ratan Tata and other directors of Tata Sons board. Now, he had filed this suit after being voted out of Tata Group Company's board way back in 2016. Today, CJI Bobde urged both the parties to settle the matter amicably. He said, and I quote him here, both of you are leaders of the industry. Why don't you sit and resolve it without pursuing litigation in this fashion? End of quote. Well, on to some action now coming in as far as JNU is concerned. The crisis situation there. Over 30 students and teachers were injured after a mob wearing masks, wielding sticks, rods and sledgehammers launched an attack on students of Jawaharlal Nehru University last evening. Now, the JNU Students' Union has accused ABVP members of carrying out the attack. However, ABVP has denied the allegations and has blamed JNUSU instead. Now, the ABVP says that they were attacked by members of Left Unity for protesting against their efforts to force a lockdown in the university. The Delhi police, meanwhile, has filed an FIR against unidentified people but hasn't made any arrests as of yet. Meanwhile, Home Minister Amit Shah has asked Delhi Lieutenant Governor Anil Baijal to call representatives from JNU for a discussion about the incident. Students have hit the streets across the country protesting against the JNU attack. In Mumbai, protesters have gathered at the Gateway of India. In Kolkata, students at Jadavpur University are at the forefront of these protests. JNU students also continue to protest against last evening's rampage. The political blame game, of course, has begun. It continues for the second day in a row.
क्लियरली एक ऑर्गेनाइज अटैक था, क्योंकि जब वो लोग मार रहे थे लोगों को, नाम ले लेके मार रहे थे, लोगों को आइडेंटिफाई भी कर रहे थे।
पर्टिकुलर एबीवीपी के कार्यकर्ता जिस रूम में है, मैं जिस रूम में था, हम 4 लोग उस रूम में छुपे हुए थे। उस रूम के दोनों तरफ के दरवाजे तोड़े, खिड़की तोड़ी, सारे शीशे तोड़े।
We ran for our lives, literally. While I was running, I had no idea where we were going.
It is a situation that was deliberately created by them.
By whom? By whom?
By the administration under the leadership of the Vice Chancellor.
We are in process of identification, so obviously arrests are in pipeline once we identify.
किसी भी शिक्षण संस्था को राजनीति का अड्डा बनने नहीं दिया जाएगा.
This is a descent into fascism. This is no longer creeping fascism. This is a rapid descent into fascism.
Nowadays, I have seen that how they are torturing the students, and they are torturing even the officers also. It is very. I am telling you, it is very disturbing. It is not only for me, it is for all.
और जिस तरीके से मैंने देखा टीवी पर, तो ये तो मुझे 26 नवंबर का जो हमला हुआ था उसकी याद आ गई.
So indeed, some very worrying picture coming in from the JNU campus there. In fact, to discuss how this tests the very principle of rule of law in our country, my colleague Jude Sanith caught up with former Supreme Court Judge Justice Madan Lokur to get his views on the JNU rampage last night. He started by asking Justice Lokur whether he felt that the JNU administration is responsible for allowing the mob into the campus. Take a look.
It's very difficult to say whether there has been any collusion. But I think, things are a little unclear in the sense that when there was some violence in Jamia, the police entered. And there was a lot of criticism that how did you enter Jamia without the permission of the Vice Chancellor and so on. Now, here when there is violence in JNU, the police did not enter, apparently, because they did not have the permission of the Vice Chancellor. So I think it's a little unclear whether the permission of the Vice Chancellor is required or it is not required. If it is required, then what happened in Jamia was, on the face of it, totally uncalled for, illegal, unconstitutional, whatever you may wish to call it. But if the police could enter Jamia without the permission of the Vice Chancellor, I do not see why they could not enter JNU without the permission of the Vice Chancellor to stop the violence.
Right. So you bring up a very interesting paradox, with regard to both these incidents and how they may have been an issue on both sides with regard to permission itself. But let's explore the aftermath, if you will, for just a bit. Just one FIR, hardly any people detained at all. Surely the police seems to be dragging its feet with regard to what it wants to do in the aftermath of the violence. So do you see some sort of conspiracy behind it? And is there a hand, on part of the establishment with regard to ensuring the police goes as slow as possible with regard to taking action against the goons?
Yeah, well, conspiracy is a pretty strong word. But yes, I think the police is going slow. At least that's what I gather from, the reports that are coming in on the television and so on. But yeah, it is a little surprising that the police is going a little slow. I mean, they have the technology, to find out who were the persons who had come and attacked all the students.
Right.
And I think more than 24 hours have gone by, but still nothing seems to have happened.
Do you feel it's a question of misplaced priorities? As opposed to condemning the attack, the government seems to be harping on about just what should not or should happen at universities around the country.
Well, I don't want to comment on, what the government feels. That's entirely for them to decide how to react. But undoubtedly, and I don't think there can be any question about this, whatever has happened is extremely unfortunate. It should not have happened. And I think a thorough investigation is called for. The standard operating procedures with regard to the police entering, academic institutions must be laid out very, very clearly. And there must be a thorough investigation to find out what's going on. It's really shocking whatever has happened. It is very shocking, yeah, undoubtedly.
But with regard to the legality of it all, Justice, the CAA, does it provisionally violate Article 14 of the Indian Constitution? And is there some sort of a grey area with regard to all of this? I believe the situation and the legality of it is more layered than it seems, at least from the first look itself.
Well, in my view, the proviso that has been introduced in the Citizenship Amendment Act, in my view, it is constitutionally not valid. It violates Article 14, definitely. It may be violating other provisions of the Constitution as well. To that extent, I think the proviso is unconstitutional.
Right. Where do you see this going from here in terms of the fallout on the ground? Do you foresee more violence that will lie ahead? Do you feel the legal route could be taken to see some sort of, some outcome with regard to the legality of the act? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I certainly hope that there is no more violence. Violence is totally unacceptable. But the matter is pending in the Supreme Court. I think the constitutional validity of the act is pending in the Supreme Court. And I hope the Supreme Court will take it up.